The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeped into the bones, gnawed at the skin, and made the silence feel heavier. A sharp wind howled through the deserted streets, rattling loose signs and sending stray leaves tumbling along the cracked pavement. Daniel pulled his coat tighter around himself, his breath unfurling in misty tendrils before vanishing into the darkness. It had been years since he had someone to walk home to. He had learned to live with the silence, the kind that stretched beyond the absence of sound, sinking into the hollow spaces in his chest. Most nights, he welcomed it. But tonight, something felt different. Then, he heard it. A sound so faint, so fragile, he almost mistook it for the wind. A whimper. Daniel stopped, his grip tightening around his cane. His eyes flicked toward the alley beside him, swallowed in shadows, where the smell of damp concrete and forgotten trash lingered. Another whimper, soft, desperate, aching with something he knew too well. He turned toward the darkness. At first he saw nothing but the dim glint of metal dumpsters, their rusting edges catching what little light trickled in from the street lamp. But then, movement. A trembling shape nestled between two overflowing bins. A puppy. Daniel's breath caught. It was small, far too small to be out in this cold. Its golden fur, once bright, was now caked with mud and tangled with grime. The tiny body shivered violently, ribs faintly visible beneath its frail frame. But it was the eyes that stopped Daniel in his tracks. Two pools of liquid brown, wide with fear, yet brimming with silent hope. A familiar ache tightened in his chest. "Hey there, little guy," Daniel murmured, lowering himself carefully. The cane bore his weight as he crouched, his joints protesting the movement. The puppy flinched, pressing itself tighter against the cold wall. But it didn't run. It couldn't. It was too weak, too cold. Daniel hesitated. He shouldn't. He had told himself that part of his life was over. He had learned painfully what it meant to say goodbye. And yet, before he could second-guess himself, he slipped off his scarf and reached out, slow and steady. The pup flinched again but didn't fight as Daniel wrapped the warm fabric around its fragile body. It was so light in his hands, barely more than a breath. As he cradled the trembling creature, something inside him cracked open. A memory, old but vivid, rushed in. The weight of another dog in his arms, the feel of soft fur beneath his fingertips, the warmth of unconditional love. A name he hadn't spoken in years lingered on his tongue, but he swallowed it down. The past could not be changed. But the present? Daniel exhaled, adjusting his grip. "Guess you're coming with me." His voice was softer than he intended, thick with something unspoken. The puppy didn't resist. It simply curled into the warmth of his chest, letting out a tiny sigh of surrender. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel's footsteps felt lighter. The night no longer seemed so empty. Daniel's small apartment had never felt so alive. The silence he had grown accustomed to was now replaced with the soft patter of paws and the occasional curious sniffing of Buddy as he explored every inch of his new home. The little golden pup moved cautiously at first, his tiny nose twitching as he inspected the old furniture and the fireplace's faint scent of burnt wood. Settling into his recliner, Daniel observed the puppy's every move with quiet amusement. "You're a curious one, aren't you?" he murmured. Buddy's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, his tail wagging slightly before he padded over. He attempted to jump onto the couch but failed, landing with a soft thud. Daniel chuckled and leaned forward to pick him up. All right," he muttered, setting Buddy on his lap. The pup sighed in contentment, curling up into a tiny, golden ball. A knock at the door made them both jump. Daniel frowned before calling out, "Who is it?" "It's me, Clara," came a familiar voice. Daniel sighed, shaking his head. Clara was his neighbor, a retired nurse who had a habit of checking in on him, much to his reluctant gratitude. As he shuffled to the door with his cane, Buddy trotted behind him, tail wagging in excitement. The moment Daniel opened the door, Clara's sharp gaze landed on Buddy. "Well, well," she said, her lips twitching into a smile. "You finally got yourself some company." Daniel scoffed. "Didn't have much of a choice. He found me." Clara knelt, extending a hand for Buddy to sniff. "And what's your name, little one?" "Buddy," Daniel replied. Clara's smile widened. "That's a good name." She straightened, crossing her arms. "And you? You look better already." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Don't start." She chuckled. "I'm just saying. Maybe this little guy is exactly what you needed." Daniel looked down at Buddy, who had nestled against his leg, his tiny body rising and falling with each peaceful breath. He exhaled slowly, a rare, soft smile tugging at his lips. Maybe Clara was right. For the first time in years, the silence in Daniel's home didn't feel lonely. It felt warm. It felt whole. The days turned into weeks, and Buddy quickly became Daniel's shadow. The once quiet apartment now carried the soft jingling of a tiny collar and the rhythmic tapping of paws against the wooden floor. Buddy's presence brought a warmth Daniel hadn't realized he was missing, but it also brought something unexpected, an awareness of just how much he had been carrying alone. At night, the weight of memories often pressed down on Daniel's chest like a heavy fog. The past had a way of creeping in when the world was dark and still. He would wake up, heart pounding, breath shallow, the echoes of old wounds whispering in his mind. Those nights, he would sit on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, feeling the kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. But now, he wasn't alone. One particularly restless night, Daniel woke with a start, his body drenched in sweat. His old war injury throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that reminded him of the past he tried so hard to forget. He groaned softly, rubbing his temples, willing himself to push the memories away. Then, a soft weight pressed against his leg. Looking down, he saw Buddy sitting by his feet, head tilted, eyes filled with quiet understanding. He had been asleep in his dog bed just moments ago, yet somehow he had sensed Daniel's unease. Without hesitation, Buddy placed his small, warm body against Daniel's leg, as if grounding him to the present. Daniel exhaled shakily, running a hand over his face. "You don't have to stay up with me, kid," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. But Buddy didn't move. Instead, he let out a soft whimper, resting his head on Daniel's knee. The tension in Daniel's shoulders eased ever so slightly. He reached down, running his fingers through Buddy's soft fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his small body. The rhythmic motion calmed something deep inside him, something he hadn't been able to soothe on his own. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, the tightness in Daniel's chest loosened, and exhaustion tugged at him again. But this time, it didn't feel so heavy. He sighed, shifting back into bed, but before he could call Buddy back to his little bed in the corner, the puppy curled up right next to him. Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head. "All right, fine. Just for tonight." Buddy sighed in response, already half asleep. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel alone in the darkness. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting golden stripes of light across Daniel's modest living room. Buddy lay sprawled out on his back, paws twitching as he dreamed. Daniel sat in his chair, sipping his coffee, lost in thought. It had been years since he had taken a walk beyond the small grocery store down the block. His injury had made movement difficult, and his heart had made isolation easier. But now, there was Buddy, and Buddy needed more than the four walls of his apartment. Taking a deep breath, Daniel reached for Buddy's leash, his fingers tightening around the leather handle. "All right, boy," he said, his voice steady. "Let's try this." Buddy perked up immediately, scrambling to his feet with an excited yip. His tail wagged furiously as Daniel clipped the leash onto his collar. The anticipation in Buddy's bright eyes was almost contagious. Almost. The first step outside was the hardest. The sunlight was brighter than he remembered, the air crisper, full of the scent of damp earth and fresh grass. Buddy trotted ahead eagerly, only to stop and look back at Daniel, as if waiting for him to catch up. One step, then another, and another. Each movement was a reminder, a dull ache in his leg, a whisper of old pain. But Buddy's enthusiasm never wavered. He sniffed at leaves, barked at passing birds, and wagged his tail at a group of children playing on the sidewalk. Then came the bench. Daniel sighed as he eased himself onto the wooden seat, exhaling sharply. His leg throbbed, but it was manageable. Buddy hopped up beside him, his warm body pressing against Daniel's side. They sat there for a long moment, watching the world pass by. Clara's voice broke the silence. "Didn't expect to see you out here?" Daniel smirked. "Yeah, well, Buddy had other plans." Clara smiled, her eyes softening. "Looks like he's helping you as much as you're helping him." Daniel looked down at Buddy, who was now dozing off beside him, utterly content. He reached out, gently scratching behind the pup's ears. Maybe, just maybe, she was right. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, swirling golden leaves across the pavement as Daniel and Buddy made their way through the park. It had become their daily ritual, something Daniel looked forward to more than he cared to admit. But today, there was something different. An unspoken tension in the air that even Buddy seemed to sense. Daniel's grip on the leash tightened. They had never gone this far before. The familiar route, the small grocery store, the bench near the fountain, had always been his limit. But today, Buddy had pulled him forward, past his usual boundaries. And now, they stood at the edge of the lake, its still waters reflecting the shifting hues of the setting sun. Buddy wagged his tail, looking up at Daniel expectantly. The message was clear. Trust me. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure if he trusted himself. The past still clung to him, whispering doubts into his mind. He had spent so long convincing himself that he couldn't move beyond the walls of his own pain. But Buddy had never believed that. And standing here, staring into those hopeful brown eyes, Daniel felt something shift inside him. With a slow breath, he unclipped the leash. Buddy didn't run. He didn't dart away. Instead, he took a single step forward, then turned back, waiting, encouraging. Daniel exhaled, his chest tightening. "All right, boy," he murmured. "I'm right behind you." Together they moved forward, step by step. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt free. As they walked, the air smelled of damp earth and pine, the kind of scent that reminded Daniel of his childhood. Long summers spent outside, scraped knees, and endless adventures. It was a feeling he thought he had lost, buried under years of fear and pain. But now, with Buddy leading him forward, he felt something stir deep within him, a forgotten warmth. They wandered down a winding path, past families playing frisbee and couples strolling hand in hand. Some people glanced their way. offering small smiles or nods of acknowledgement. Daniel barely noticed. His focus was on Buddy, who pranced beside him with an unshakable confidence, as if he had always known they would make it here someday. Then suddenly, a loud noise. A bicycle bell, sharp and unexpected. Buddy froze. So did Daniel. For a brief moment, panic flared in Daniel's chest. Would Buddy run? Would he get scared and bolt into the woods? His breath hitched, and old fears crept up, but before they could take hold, Buddy did something Daniel hadn't expected. He turned around. He looked at Daniel. It was a moment so small, yet so profound. Buddy wasn't just any dog. He was Daniel's companion, his anchor. He wasn't going anywhere. Daniel knelt, pressing his hand to Buddy's head. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Buddy leaned into the touch, his tail wagging, and just like that, they continued their walk side by side. The world no longer felt as daunting. The walls Daniel had built around himself weren't so high anymore. By the time they returned home, the sky had darkened, stars blinking into existence above them. Daniel unlocked the door and let Buddy inside, pausing for a moment before stepping through himself. Maybe, just maybe, tomorrow they'd go even further. The world had a strange way of slowing down when you knew you were losing something precious. The golden autumn leaves that once swayed gently in the breeze now drifted aimlessly to the ground, and the sunlight that used to dance across the hardwood floor seemed dimmer. Daniel sat on the floor beside Buddy's bed, his fingers gently stroking the soft fur that had once been so full of life. Buddy had been slowing down for weeks. The boundless energy that once propelled him through the park had faded into slow, measured steps. His tail still wagged, but not with the same intensity. His deep brown eyes still held love, but they carried something else now. Fatigue. Daniel had known this day would come, but knowing didn't make it easier. He had lost people before. Friends, family. But Buddy wasn't just a pet. He was a part of him, a piece of his heart that had stitched itself back together when everything else had fallen apart. "Hey, boy," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "Remember our first walk?" Buddy's tail thumped weakly against the floor, a ghost of the enthusiasm he had once shown for their adventures. Daniel chuckled softly, though his eyes were wet. "You practically dragged me out the door. Guess you always knew I needed saving." Memories flooded his mind. The way Buddy had refused to leave his side on the bad days, the quiet companionship during sleepless nights, the way he had taught Daniel to trust again. He had thought he was rescuing Buddy, but in the end, Buddy had rescued him. A soft knock at the door pulled Daniel from his thoughts. Clara stepped in quietly, her face a mix of sympathy and understanding. She knelt beside Daniel, reaching out to run her fingers through Buddy's fur. "He's had a good life," she said gently, "because of you." Daniel swallowed hard, nodding. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. He never would be. But he could make sure Buddy's last moments were filled with love. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, a rhythmic reminder of time passing, of moments slipping away like grains of sand. Daniel found himself whispering old stories to Buddy, his voice soft and trembling. Tales of their best days. The time Buddy had jumped into the lake after his shoe. The first time Buddy had confidently walked off leash beside him. The night Daniel had sat on the floor with a bottle of whiskey, and Buddy had silently nudged his head under Daniel's hand, refusing to leave his side. "I wasn't alone," Daniel murmured, pressing his forehead against Buddy's. "Because of you, I never felt completely alone." Buddy's breathing was slow now, measured, as if savoring every second. Daniel wished he could make time stop just for a little while longer. Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting an amber glow over the room. The air felt heavier, quieter. Buddy lifted his head slightly, his tired eyes meeting Daniel's one last time. And then, with one final breath, he let go. Daniel sat there, unmoving, cradling Buddy in his arms. The silence felt deafening. He had known loss before, but this was different. This was a goodbye that took a piece of his heart with it. Clara placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You gave him a beautiful life," she said softly. "And he gave you one too." Daniel nodded, but the words felt hollow. It would take time, so much time to heal from this. But as he looked down at Buddy, peaceful at last, he knew one thing for certain. Some loves never fade. Some bonds never break. And Buddy would always be a part of him. The room grew darker as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Daniel sat in the quiet, holding on to the memory of the best friend he had ever known. The house felt unbearably silent. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee untouched in front of him. The warmth of the ceramic against his fingers was the only thing grounding him. Buddy's bed was still in the corner of the living room, his favorite chew toy resting beside it, as if waiting for its owner to return. But Buddy wasn't coming back. The first few days without him had been the hardest. The absence of the rhythmic tapping of paws against the wooden floor, the lack of a soft nudge against his knee during meals, it all felt suffocating. He hadn't realized just how much of his life revolved around that dog until he was gone. Clara checked in daily, sometimes bringing over food he wouldn't eat, sometimes just sitting with him in silence. "Grief is strange," she had said one evening, her voice gentle. "It doesn't follow rules. It comes in waves. Let it." Daniel wanted to let it, but he wasn't sure how. He had spent years building walls to keep pain out, and now it was seeping in through every crack. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt empty. Buddy had filled it with life, with love, with something Daniel hadn't even realized he had needed. One evening, Daniel found himself standing at the front door, leash in hand. It was a habit, grabbing it before heading out for a walk. He stared at the looped handle, his chest tightening. The leash felt useless now, like a relic from another life, and he almost put it away, but something stopped him. Instead, he stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. He started walking, not toward their usual route, but somewhere new. The streets were quieter at this hour, the sky a blend of deep purples and soft oranges as the sun dipped below the horizon. As he walked, his mind wandered. He thought about the first time he had walked these streets with Buddy, how the dog had practically pulled him along, eager to explore. He thought about the rainy afternoons spent curled up together, the laughter, the unspoken understanding between them. His feet carried him to the park before he even realized it. The bench near the fountain, their spot, was empty. Daniel hesitated before sitting down, his hands clasped together, staring at the rippling water. A soft bark pulled him from his thoughts. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the park. A small Labrador puppy, no more than a few months old, was struggling to climb onto the bench beside him. Its golden fur shone under the dimming light, and its eyes, warm, curious, stared up at him with an innocence that squeezed at his heart. "Hey there, Buddy," Daniel murmured, his voice hoarse. The pup wagged its tail, nuzzling against his knee as if it had always belonged there. Daniel hesitated before reaching out, his fingers brushing over the soft fur. A lump formed in his throat. A voice called from a distance, "Max! There you are!" A woman jogged over, breathless, a leash dangling from her hand. I'm so sorry. He's still learning to listen. Daniel forced a small smile, his fingers still resting against the pup's head. He's got a good spirit. She smiled back. Yeah, he does. He was rescued from a shelter a few weeks ago. He's still a little unsure about the world. Daniel glanced down at the pup, who licked his hand, eyes filled with trust. Something in his chest shifted, just slightly, as the woman clipped the leash onto the puppy's collar. She hesitated. You know, the shelter has more like him. If you're ever looking. Daniel swallowed, nodding, though he wasn't sure he was ready. But as he watched Max trot away, tail wagging, something inside him whispered that maybe, just maybe, one day, he would be. The days stretched into weeks, and the emptiness in Daniel's house remained. The quiet was something he was still getting used to, but no matter how much time passed, he still found himself listening for the familiar jingle of Buddy's collar or the soft thud of paws following him from room to room. It was a habit that refused to fade. One late afternoon, Daniel found himself driving without a destination. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, casting a soft glow over the town. His hands tightened around the steering wheel as he realized where he was going. The shelter. He parked outside and sat there for a moment, staring at the building. His heart pounded in his chest. Was he ready for this? He had told himself that no dog could replace Buddy. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about replacing. Maybe it was about making space for something new. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and walked inside. The scent of dog food and cleaning solution filled the air, a mixture of comfort and sadness. Rows of kennels lined the walls, each one housing hopeful eyes, wagging tails, or nervous whimpers. A volunteer approached him with a warm smile. Looking to adopt? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Just looking for now. The volunteer gestured for him to follow. Take your time. Every dog here has a story. Some just need someone to believe in them again. Daniel walked past the kennels, his eyes scanning over the dogs. Some barked excitedly, pressing against the bars in hopes of being noticed. Others sat quietly, their gazes weary and uncertain. Then, near the end of the row, he saw her. A small Labrador mix curled up in the corner of her kennel, her golden fur matted and dull. She didn't jump or bark like the others. She just lifted her head and met his gaze. Her eyes held something Daniel recognized all too well: loss. He crouched down, studying her. "Hey, girl," he said softly. She remained still for a moment. Then, cautiously, she stood and took a hesitant step toward him. The volunteer noticed. "That's Lily," she said. "She was found abandoned a few months ago. Took a while for her to trust people again. She's a sweetheart, just a little cautious." Daniel swallowed hard. He knew what that kind of hurt felt like. The fear of trusting again, the hesitance to let anyone in. He reached his fingers through the bars. "It's okay," he whispered. "I know it's scary." Lily sniffed his hand, her nose cold and gentle. Then, after a moment of hesitation, she licked his fingers. Daniel felt something shift inside him. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe fate, maybe healing. But in that instant, he knew. "She's the one," he murmured. The volunteer beamed. "Let's get you two properly introduced." Daniel took a deep breath. Maybe he hadn't been looking for a new companion that day. Maybe he had just been looking for a sign. And Lily, she needed someone just as much as he did. As he signed the adoption papers, he glanced down at the small dog curled at his feet, already leaning into him as if she had found where she belonged. Daniel smiled for the first time in a long time. "Come on, girl," he said, leading her toward the door. "Let's go home." Title: The house felt different with Lily in it. The emptiness wasn't gone, but it was softer, filled with the quiet presence of another soul who understood loss. Daniel watched as she hesitated at the threshold, sniffing the air cautiously before stepping inside. She was careful, unsure, as if she was waiting for this new reality to be taken from her. He knew that feeling all too well. "Take your time, girl," he murmured, setting down a soft blanket near the couch. Lily circled it twice before lying down, her ears twitching at every small sound. Daniel sat across from her, observing the way she tucked her tail around herself. A habit of a dog who had learned to expect the worst. The first few days were quiet. Lily ate her meals without excitement, moved carefully, and flinched at sudden noises. But she watched Daniel closely. Every time he sat on the couch, she inched a little closer. Every time he stepped outside, she followed him to the door, watching as if afraid he wouldn't return. One evening, as Daniel sat with an old book in his hands, he felt the faintest touch, a cold, wet nose nudging against his palm. He stilled. Lily looked up at him with those deep brown eyes, filled with uncertainty but also something else. Hope. His heart clenched. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, gently running his fingers through her fur. She didn't pull away. Instead, she sighed, leaning into his touch for the first time. From that moment, the walls between them started to crumble. Slowly, Lily's personality began to emerge. She had a curious nature, tilting her head at the sound of birds outside, following Daniel from room to room with cautious steps. Her tail, once low and still, now wagged ever so slightly when she saw him. But it was their first walk together that changed everything. Daniel hesitated before picking up the leash. He hadn't held one since Buddy. It felt heavier than it should have. He glanced at Lily, who was already sitting by the door, her ears perked up. "All right," he exhaled. "Let's do this." As they stepped outside, Lily kept close to his side, her movements uncertain. The familiar park was quiet at this hour, the golden glow of the evening sun casting long shadows across the path. Daniel took slow, steady steps, allowing Lily to set the pace. Halfway through the walk, a squirrel darted across their path. Lily froze. Daniel braced himself for her to bolt, but instead she turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. Something inside him broke open. "You're safe," he reassured her. "I promise." And for the first time, she believed him. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he heard a soft sound, a gentle rustling, the quiet padding of paws on the hardwood floor. He didn't move, just waited. A moment later, a warm weight settled at the foot of the bed. Daniel smiled in the darkness. He didn't reach for her, didn't move. This was her choice, and maybe, just maybe, they were both healing together. Over the next few weeks, Lily blossomed in ways Daniel never expected. She started greeting him at the door when he came home, her tail wagging with hesitant excitement. She found her favorite spot by the fireplace, curling up there during quiet evenings. And most importantly, she started to trust. One morning, as Daniel sipped his coffee, he noticed Lily standing by the door, staring at him expectantly. He raised an eyebrow. "You want to go for a walk?" he asked. Lily's tail wagged, just slightly. He chuckled, setting his mug down. "All right, let's go." As they strolled through the park, something shifted. Lily no longer hesitated. She explored with confidence, sniffing at the grass, watching birds, even wagging her tail at a passing jogger. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. Then, as they reached a familiar bench, Daniel sat down. Lily hopped up beside him, pressing her warm body against his. He stared out at the lake, his mind drifting to memories of Buddy. The pain was still there, but it didn't feel as sharp anymore. It felt bearable. He looked down at Lily, gently scratching behind her ears. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Lily sighed contentedly and rested her head on his lap, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel truly believed it. Months passed, and the once quiet house now hummed with a warmth Daniel had thought he had lost forever. Lily was no longer a shadow of her past. She greeted each morning with enthusiasm, running to the door as Daniel reached for his shoes. Their routine had become second nature: walks at sunrise, lazy afternoons in the sunlit living room, evenings spent by the fire. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel decided it was time. With Lily trotting excitedly beside him, he drove to the shelter where they had first met. A familiar woman greeted him with a knowing smile. "Lily looks great," she said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "She's happy." "She saved me as much as I saved her," Daniel admitted. They walked through the kennels, past hopeful eyes and wagging tails. Daniel hadn't realized how ready he was until he saw him. A young Labrador mix, golden fur and soulful eyes, sitting patiently as if waiting for them. Lily sniffed at the kennel door, her tail wagging. No hesitation, no fear. Daniel smiled, kneeling beside her. "What do you think, girl?" Lily licked his hand before turning back to the pup, offering the tiniest playful bow. The young dog responded in kind, tail thumping eagerly. The decision was made. As they drove home, Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily sat proudly beside the new addition, her eyes shining with something Daniel recognized all too well: hope. For the first time in years, the house wouldn't feel empty. It would be filled with laughter, with love, with the echoes of paws running across the floor. But adopting the new pup wasn't just about bringing another dog home. It was about giving Lily something she had given him: a second chance. The young Labrador, whom Daniel named Finn, quickly found his place in their little family. He was rambunctious, full of energy, and absolutely adored Lily. At first she watched him cautiously, unsure of his playful antics, but within days she was chasing him through the backyard, their paws kicking up fallen leaves as they ran side by side. The once wounded soul had become a guiding light for another, just as Daniel had done for her. One evening, as Daniel sat on the porch sipping his tea, he watched them play. The sunset painted the sky in hues of amber and violet, and the sound of Finn's excited barks filled the air. Lily, once timid and broken, now wrestled playfully with her new brother, her tail wagging freely. Daniel felt something settle inside him, a peace he hadn't known he was searching for. Finn, exhausted from play, trotted over and flopped down beside Daniel's feet. Lily followed, resting her head against his knee. Daniel ran his fingers through her fur, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You did good, girl," he whispered. "You saved me." She sighed, her warm breath fanning against his skin, and in that moment, Daniel knew. He had thought he was rescuing Lily, but in truth, she had rescued him. The past no longer held him captive. The grief, though still present, had softened, making space for something new: love, growth, a future he never imagined he'd find again. As the stars emerged in the night sky, Daniel leaned back, his heart full. Lily and Finn curled up beside him, content in their newfound family. They weren't just healing anymore. They were whole, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt truly, undeniably happy.